Welcome to today's incredible journey into the past, where we'll uncover the most shocking truths about our mysterious evolutionary cousins. Picture this. You're walking through a forest in Europe 60,000 years ago. The morning mist clings to ancient trees as you hear the snap of branches nearby. Through the fog, a figure emerges stockier than you, with massive shoulders and a distinctive brow ridge that catches the filtered sunlight. Their eyes meet yours, and in that moment, you see something unmistakably intelligent, calculating, and deeply human. This is your first encounter with a Neanderthal. For over 300,000 years, they dominated Europe and vast stretches of Asia. They survived ice ages that would have killed us in weeks. They had brains often larger than ours, hands stronger than any modern human, and the ability to see clearly in near darkness. They created sophisticated tools, made the world's first known glue, built underground fire factories, and painted caves with pigments they carried for miles. Some of them had red hair and pale skin, just like many Europeans today. They buried their dead with flowers, cared for disabled children, and may have been the first musicians in human history. Yet 40,000 years ago, they vanished completely from the earth. But here's the mind-blowing twist that changes everything. They never really disappeared. Their DNA flows through the veins of billions of people alive today. In fact, with nearly 8 billion humans carrying Neanderthal genes, there has never been more Neanderthal DNA on Earth than right now. Today, cutting-edge DNA analysis, revolutionary archaeological discoveries, and artificial intelligence are rewriting everything we thought we knew about our closest evolutionary cousins. The real story of the Neanderthals is far more incredible, more tragic, and more relevant to our own survival than anything Hollywood could imagine. Chapter 1. The first humans of Europe. It's 430,000 years ago in the sun-drenched limestone caves of Atapuerca, northern Spain. Deep underground, in a natural pit that will one day be called Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones. Dozens of early humans have gathered for reasons lost to time. Perhaps this underground chamber served as a sacred burial ground, the world's first cemetery. Maybe they fell into this limestone abyss during a hunt gone wrong. Or perhaps they were deliberately placed here in humanity's earliest ritual of death and remembrance. Whatever brought them here, their bones would tell one of the most extraordinary stories in human evolution. When archaeologists discovered this site in the 1970s, they uncovered over 6,500 human fossils, representing at least 28 individuals. The largest collection of early human remains ever found in one location. But these weren't quite modern humans, nor were they the brutish ape men of popular imagination. These were something else entirely. The ancestors of the Neanderthals, our evolutionary cousins who were just beginning their remarkable 400,000-year journey. The story of Neanderthal origins doesn't begin with a single moment, but with a gradual split that would change the course of human history forever. Around 500,000 to 650,000 years ago, somewhere in Africa or the Middle East, a population of early humans began to diverge into two separate evolutionary paths. One group would remain in Africa and eventually give rise to us modern humans, Homo sapiens. The other would venture north into the unforgiving landscapes of Europe and Western Asia, where they would face challenges that would forge them into something entirely different. Their journey wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. Europe during this period was a world that would be almost unrecognizable today. Massive ice sheets stretched down from the Arctic, covering much of northern Europe in glaciers thousands of feet thick. Temperatures regularly plummeted far below anything modern humans had experienced. The landscape shifted dramatically with each glacial cycle, turning lush forests into frozen tundra and back again. Over periods of thousands of years, most species would have died out or retreated south. But these early Europeans didn't just survive, they thrived, developing remarkable adaptations that would define their descendants for the next 400,000 years. Natural selection worked with ruthless efficiency, favoring those with larger, more robust bodies that could better conserve heat. Their limbs became proportionally shorter, their torsos wider, their overall muscle mass dramatically increased. These weren't random changes. They were precise evolutionary responses to one of the most challenging environments on Earth. The earliest known examples of Neanderthal-like fossils are around 430,000 years old, found at sites like Cima de los Huesos in Spain and Swanscombe in England. By 400,000 years ago, the Neanderthal lineage was already well established across Europe. These early Neanderthals were showing the distinctive features that would characterize their species: enlarged brains, robust skeletal structures, and specialized anatomical adaptations for life in the cold. But who were their immediate ancestors? Current evidence suggests they evolved from an earlier species called Homo heidelbergensis, a successful human species that had already spread across Africa, Europe, and parts of Asia by 600,000 years ago. However, the European populations of Homo heidelbergensis began adapting to their harsh northern environment in unique ways, gradually becoming something new and remarkable. The evolutionary pressures they faced were unlike anything their African relatives experienced. Ice ages came and went with clockwork regularity, each one lasting tens of thousands of years. During glacial periods, much of Europe became a frozen wasteland where only the most adaptable could survive. During warmer interglacials, forests returned and new opportunities emerged. Those who survived this endless cycle of freeze and thaw developed not just physical adaptations, but cultural and technological innovations that would serve them for hundreds of thousands of years. Archaeological evidence from sites like Boxgrove in England and Arago in France shows us that by 400,000 years ago, these proto-Neanderthals were already sophisticated hunters and toolmakers. They were systematically butchering massive animals like straight-tusked elephants and woolly rhinoceros, using carefully planned hunting strategies that required incredible coordination, intelligence, and advanced tool technology. The sheer scale of these hunts is staggering. At Extinction in Germany, archaeologists found wooden spears 400,000 years old, precisely crafted for taking down large game. The DNA evidence tells an even more fascinating story. Ancient genetic material extracted from the Cima de los Huesos remains some of the oldest human DNA ever recovered, places these early Europeans firmly on the Neanderthal genetic lineage. This genetic analysis has revolutionized our understanding of Neanderthal origins, confirming that their lineage was well established in Europe hundreds of thousands of years before they ever encountered modern humans. From these Spanish caves, early Neanderthals spread across an enormous territory. Their range eventually extended from Portugal and Wales in the west, all the way to the Altai Mountains of Siberia in the east, and from Belgium in the north down to the Mediterranean coast and into the Middle East. This wasn't a small, isolated population struggling to survive. Neanderthals successfully colonized vast territories, adapting to environments ranging from Mediterranean coastlines to subarctic tundra. What's remarkable is the speed with which they developed their distinctive characteristics. Within just a few 100,000 years of their split from our common ancestor, Neanderthals had evolved many of the traits that would define them. Dramatically enlarged brains, incredibly robust skeletal structure, and sophisticated cultural behaviors that went far beyond mere survival. The fossil record shows these changes happening gradually but consistently over time. From 200,000 years ago, and especially from 120,000 years ago, the anatomical characteristics that we recognize as distinctly Neanderthal became much more pronounced. By this time, they had developed the classic features we know today: prominent brow ridges, receding foreheads, robust jaws without chins, and distinctive cranial shape that accommodated their enlarged brains. But perhaps most importantly, they were developing something that would set them apart from all other human species of their time, an incredibly sophisticated culture. Even these early Neanderthals were showing signs of complex behavior that went far beyond basic survival needs. They were making advanced tools using techniques that required years of training to master. They were controlling fire in ways that suggest deep understanding of combustion and heat management. Some evidence even suggests they were creating the first forms of symbolic expression, laying the groundwork for art and language. The success of these early Neanderthals stemmed from their remarkable ability to adapt not just physically, but culturally and technologically. While their African relatives remained in relatively stable climatic conditions, Neanderthals mastered the art of survival in a world where the rules constantly changed. They learned to read the subtle signs of changing seasons, to predict animal migrations, to find shelter and resources in landscapes that shifted dramatically over their lifetimes. This adaptability would serve them well throughout their long history, allowing them to survive multiple ice ages and thrive in diverse environments. But it also came with hidden costs, high energy requirements, slower reproduction rates, and smaller population sizes that would eventually play a role in their extinction. Understanding Neanderthal origins helps us understand ourselves. We share a common ancestor with these remarkable people, and in many ways, they represent the path not taken in human evolution. They show us that there was nothing inevitable about our own species' dominance. We are here not because we were destined to rule the earth, but because of a complex series of events that could have unfolded very differently as these early Neanderthals established themselves across Europe and Western Asia. They continued evolving and adapting. Over the next few 100,000 years, they would develop into one of the most physically powerful and intellectually capable human species that ever lived. Chapter 2. Built like Ryoresim, facing a Neanderthal warrior in their prime. Standing before you is someone about 5 feet 5 inches tall, not particularly imposing by today's standards. But as your eyes adjust, you realize this person is built like no human you've ever encountered. Their shoulders are absolutely massive, easily twice the width of a modern athlete's. Their arms are so muscular they seem to bulge even at rest, and their hands look powerful enough to crush stones. Their chest is incredibly broad and deep, almost barrel-shaped, rising and falling with each breath like a biological bellows. Their neck disappears into shoulders so thick they form an almost continuous slope from ear to arm. This isn't science fiction or artistic exaggeration. This is what cutting-edge biomechanical analysis and forensic reconstruction tells us about Neanderthal anatomy. They weren't just strong. They were superhuman by modern standards, possessing physical capabilities that would make Olympic athletes look frail by comparison. Neanderthals were generally short and stocky, but these simple words don't capture the sheer power packed into their frames. In a detailed analysis of 45 Neanderthal long bones from 14 men and 7 women, researchers found that males averaged 164 to 168 centimeters, tall about 5 feet 5 inches to 5 feet 6 inches, while females averaged 152 to 156 centimeters, roughly 5 feet to 5 feet 1 inch. But what they lacked in height, they more than made up for in raw physical power and robusticity. Since their split from our common ancestor, both Neanderthal and modern human lineages increased brain size, but they did so in completely different ways. While our ancestors in Africa developed taller, leaner builds optimized for long-distance travel and endurance, Neanderthals became short and incredibly massive. Average males weighed about 170 pounds, despite their shorter stature, giving them a body mass index that would be considered overweight by modern standards, except this wasn't fat. It was pure muscle and bone density. Their muscular development was extraordinary in ways that modern humans can barely comprehend. Neanderthals had proportionally more fast-twitch muscle fibers than any living human population. Fast-twitch fibers generate explosive power, the kind needed for sprinting, jumping, and delivering devastating blows. Their entire musculature was essentially a biological machine optimized for strength and power rather than endurance. This incredible muscle development came with enormous caloric demands. Conservative estimates suggest that an average Neanderthal male needed between 4,000 and 5,000 calories per day, nearly double what an active modern human requires. During winter months or periods of intense activity, their energy needs may have approached 6,000 calories daily. To put this in perspective, that's more food than most modern humans eat in 2 full days. Their skeletal structure tells the story of a body engineered for incredible physical stress. Neanderthal bones are not just larger than ours, they're fundamentally different in design. The attachment points for muscles, visible as ridges and bumps on fossil bones, are dramatically enlarged compared to modern humans. These muscle attachment sites tell us that Neanderthal muscles were not only bigger, but attached to their bones in ways that provided maximum leverage and power. Their limbs were proportionally shorter than ours, which provided crucial advantages in their harsh environment. Shorter limbs meant less surface area exposed to cold, helping them conserve heat during brutal Ice Age winters. But shorter limbs also meant their muscles could generate more force. Basic physics tells us that shorter levers create more power. A Neanderthal's shorter forearms meant their biceps could generate crushing grip strength that no modern human could match. Biomechanical analysis suggests that Neanderthals were potentially 30 to 50% stronger than modern humans of similar size. Their grip strength may have exceeded 200 pounds of force strong enough to crush bones with their bare hands. This wasn't just useful for hunting. It was essential for their stone tool technology, which required tremendous force to shape and maintain their heavy implements. But perhaps their most remarkable feature was their brain. The average Neanderthal brain was significantly larger than ours, averaging 1,640 cubic centimeters in males and 1,460 cubic centimeters in females. To put this in perspective, the average modern human brain is about 1,350 cubic centimeters. The largest Neanderthal brain ever measured, from a specimen called IMU-1, was 1,736 cubic centimeters, one of the largest brains ever recorded in any human species. However, these larger brains were organized very differently from ours. To accommodate their increased brain size, Neanderthal skulls expanded lengthwise, becoming almost football-shaped, while modern human skulls became more globular, like soccer balls. This different shape meant different internal organization, with implications for how they processed information and interacted with their world. Much of their extra brain volume was dedicated to enhanced visual processing and body control rather than complex social cognition. Neanderthals had significantly larger eye sockets than modern humans, indicating enhanced visual systems that gave them superior eyesight, especially in low-light conditions. This was crucial during the long, dark winters of Ice Age Europe, when good vision could mean the difference between life and death. Their respiratory system was equally impressive and perfectly adapted to their high-energy lifestyle. Neanderthal chest cavities were proportionally much larger than ours, with broader rib cages and deeper torsos. This enhanced breathing capacity served multiple purposes. It provided the oxygen needed to fuel their powerful muscles, helped them maintain their high metabolic rate, and may have aided in thermoregulation during extreme cold. Some researchers suggest that Neanderthals may have developed enhanced night vision and superior breathing capacity, specifically to fuel their incredibly fast metabolism. Their entire cardiovascular system was essentially a high-performance engine designed to support their powerful physique and energy-intensive lifestyle. Their hands and arms tell a particularly striking story of adaptation to physical demands. Neanderthal arm bones show attachment points for muscles that were dramatically larger than anything seen in modern humans. Their hands were broader and more robust than ours, with extremely strong grip capabilities. Despite having slightly different proportions, shorter thumbs and index fingers relative to their other digits, they were capable of incredibly precise manipulation, as evidenced by their sophisticated tool-making abilities. The skeletal evidence also reveals the physical costs of their powerful lifestyle. Neanderthal fossils show extensive evidence of traumatic injuries, broken bones, and wear patterns that suggest lives of incredible physical stress. Many show healed fractures from hunting accidents, attacks by large predators, or other violent encounters. Remarkably, many of these injuries show evidence of healing, indicating not only that Neanderthals survived tremendous physical trauma, but also that they cared for injured members of their groups during recovery periods that could last months. Their teeth tell another story of adaptation to their demanding environment. Neanderthal front teeth often show extreme wear patterns, worn down almost to the root. Microscopic analysis reveals that they use their teeth as tools, gripping objects while working them with stone implements. Their powerful jaws could generate tremendous bite force, useful both for processing tough foods and for tool use. The energy requirements for maintaining such a powerful body had profound implications for every aspect of Neanderthal life. They needed to constantly hunt and gather food, requiring them to be among the most effective predators ever to walk the earth. A single Neanderthal consumed as much food as two modern humans, meaning their environmental impact was enormous despite their relatively small population sizes. This high energy demand also influenced their social structure and mobility patterns. Unlike modern humans, who could survive on smaller amounts of food and travel light across vast distances, Neanderthals were tied to resource-rich areas where they could meet their enormous caloric needs. This may have limited their ability to explore new territories or adapt quickly to changing environmental conditions. Their robust build provided incredible advantages in their world, but also came with hidden costs. While their strength and power made them formidable hunters and survivors, their high energy requirements meant they were vulnerable to resource scarcity. Their bodies were perfectly adapted for their Ice Age environment, but this specialization may have become a liability when their world began to change rapidly. Understanding Neanderthal physiology gives us insights into alternative paths that human evolution could have taken. Their combination of enhanced strength, enlarged brains, and specialized adaptations represents one of evolution's most impressive achievements. Up here, human species perfectly engineered for survival in one of Earth's most challenging environments. Yet their very perfection for one set of conditions may have contributed to their ultimate vulnerability when those conditions changed. Chapter 3. The genius huntrs the African savanna 70,000 years ago echoes with the thunderous footsteps of a massive elephant herd. These aren't the elephants we know today. These are straight-tusked elephants, standing nearly 13 feet tall and weighing up to 15 tons each. Their tusks alone stretch over 10 feet in length. For most predators, these giants are untouchable, too dangerous and too powerful to consider as prey. But a group of Neanderthals watches from the shadows, and in their eyes burns the calculated intelligence of apex predators who have turned the impossible into routine. What happened next would seem like fantasy if we didn't have the archaeological evidence to prove it. These Neanderthals, using nothing but wooden spears and stone tools, would bring down one of these colossal beasts through a combination of courage, skill, and tactical intelligence that rivals anything in the modern military playbook. Neanderthal. Hunting prowess wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary, representing a level of coordination, planning, and raw physical capability that wouldn't be seen again until the development of modern weapons. They were the ultimate persistence hunters, capable of taking on prey that no other predator dared to challenge. The evidence comes from sites across Europe, where archaeologists have found the remains of massive animals clearly killed and butchered by Neanderthals. At Neumark Nord in Germany, they find evidence of systematic hunting of aurochs, wild cattle that stood 6 feet tall at the shoulder, with horn spans reaching nearly 8 feet. At Taubach, also in Germany, cut-marked remains of 76 rhinoceros and 40 elephants tell the story of Neanderthal hunting on an almost industrial scale. But the most remarkable discovery came from Strongholds in Germany, where archaeologists uncovered wooden spears that are 400,000 years old, the oldest hunting weapons ever found. These aren't crude, hastily made sticks. They're precisely engineered killing instruments, each one carefully crafted from spruce wood, with the center of gravity calculated for maximum penetration and accuracy. The tips were fire-hardened to create spear points harder than many modern materials. These spears tell us something extraordinary about Neanderthal intelligence and planning ability. Creating such sophisticated weapons required not just understanding of wood properties and fire technology, but the ability to plan and work toward a complex goal over extended periods. Each spear represented days or weeks of careful craftsmanship, and the Neanderthals, who made them, clearly understood advanced principles of physics and engineering. Their hunting strategies were equally sophisticated. Analysis of butchery sites reveals that Neanderthals weren't just opportunistic scavengers. They were skilled strategists who planned their hunts with military precision. They studied animal behavior patterns, identified migration routes, and set up coordinated ambush that could take down prey many times their own size. One of their most effective techniques was what archaeologists call persistence hunting, essentially running large animals to exhaustion over vast distances. Neanderthals would work in teams, taking turns chasing prey across the landscape until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. Their powerful build and enhanced respiratory capacity made them ideal for this type of hunting, allowing them to maintain pursuit for hours or even days. But perhaps their most ingenious hunting innovation was their use of environmental features as weapons. At sites across Europe, archaeologists have found evidence that Neanderthals drove entire herds of animals off cliffs, into bogs, or into narrow valleys where they could be slaughtered en masse. The Marne site in France contains the remains of hundreds of bison, all apparently driven to their deaths in a single coordinated hunt. These mass hunting events required incredible coordination and communication. Dozens of Neanderthals would have to work together, positioning themselves at precise locations, coordinating their movements with split-second timing, and executing complex maneuvers that left no room for error. The level of teamwork required suggests they had developed sophisticated systems of communication and leadership. Their weapons technology went far beyond simple spears. Neanderthals created a diverse arsenal of hunting implements, each designed for specific prey and hunting conditions. They made heavy thrusting spears for close contact hunting of dangerous animals, lighter javelins for medium-range attacks, and specialized tools for finishing wounded prey. Some evidence suggests they may have even developed primitive atlatl spear throwers that could increase the range and impact of their projectiles. The diversity of animals they hunted is staggering. Neanderthal sites contain the remains of everything from massive mammoths and woolly rhinoceros down to small rabbits and birds. They hunted red deer, horses, bison, cave bears, and even dangerous predators like cave lions and hyenas. This wasn't just opportunistic hunting. Archaeological analysis shows they were selectively targeting specific animals for specific purposes. At the Abric Pizarro site in Spain, researchers found evidence that Neanderthals were hunting a remarkably diverse array of prey. The animal bones we have recovered indicate that they were successfully exploiting the surrounding fauna, hunting red deer, horses, and bison, but also eating freshwater turtles and rabbits, which imply a degree of planning rarely considered for Neanderthals. But Neanderthal genius extended far beyond hunting into food processing and resource management. At the Neumarkt site in Germany, archaeologists discovered what they now call a fat factory, a sophisticated operation where Neanderthals processed bones to extract high-calorie grease. This discovery completely revolutionized our understanding of Neanderthal food technology. The process was incredibly complex and labor-intensive. Neanderthals would collect the bones of at least 172 large mammals, including deer, horses, and aurochs. They would then systematically smash these bones into tiny fragments, a process that required enormous amounts of time and energy. Next, they created containers from birch bark or animal hides, filled them with water and bone fragments, and boiled the mixture for hours over carefully controlled fires. The result was pure, concentrated fat that could be stored for months and provided enormous amounts of energy essential during harsh winters when fresh food was scarce. This bone grease production shows that Neanderthals understood advanced principles of nutrition and resource management that wouldn't be seen again for tens of thousands of years. These weren't simple hunter-gatherers just getting by day to day, explains zooarchaeologist Jeff Smith. They were master planners who could look ahead, organize complex tasks, and squeeze every last calorie from their environment. The sophistication of their food processing techniques rivals anything developed by later human populations. Their hunting tools required equally sophisticated manufacturing processes. Neanderthals developed the Levallois technique of stone tool production around 300,000 years ago, a complex method that required extensive planning and skilled execution. This technique involved carefully preparing a stone core by removing flakes from multiple directions, then striking a single blow to remove a perfectly shaped tool blank. The process required understanding of stone properties, three-dimensional, spatial reasoning, and the ability to plan many steps ahead. But toolmaking was just the beginning. Neanderthals created composite tools, weapons, and implements made from multiple materials combined with sophisticated adhesives. They heated birch bark to precise temperatures to create tar-like glue, then used this adhesive to attach stone points to wooden shafts. This wasn't simple trial-and-error craftsmanship, required understanding of chemistry, temperature control, and material science. At Gibraltar's Vanguard Cave, archaeologists discovered evidence of an even more sophisticated technology: controlled underground fire-making chambers designed to produce tar under precisely controlled conditions. These installations show that Neanderthals understood complex principles of combustion chemistry and could manipulate fire with scientific precision. Their hunting success wasn't just about individual skill. It reflected sophisticated social organization and knowledge transfer systems. Young Neanderthals would spend years learning hunting techniques from their elders, practicing with smaller prey before gradually working up to larger and more dangerous animals. This apprenticeship system ensured that hunting knowledge was preserved and refined over generations. Archaeological evidence shows the Neanderthal hunting groups operated with clear divisions of labor. Some individuals specialized in weapon making, others in tracking and stalking, still others in the actual kill and butchery process. This specialization allowed them to achieve levels of efficiency that would have been impossible if everyone tried to master every skill. Their success as hunters had profound implications for their entire lifestyle and social structure. Unlike other human species who relied primarily on plant food supplemented by occasional meat, Neanderthals were hypercarnivores, obtaining up to 80% of their calories from animal sources. This diet provided the enormous amounts of protein and fat needed to fuel their powerful bodies, but it also meant they had to be among the most successful predators ever to exist. The hunting prowess of Neanderthals challenges every stereotype about our ancient relatives. These weren't primitive scavengers or opportunistic hunters. They were apex predators who dominated Ice Age Europe through a combination of intelligence, strength, technological innovation, and social cooperation that bordered on the miraculous. Chapter 4. Masters of Fire and Stone. In a cave deep beneath the limestone cliffs of Gibraltar, 65,000 years ago, something extraordinary is happening. The glow of carefully tended fires illuminates the faces of Neanderthal engineers as they work. With the precision of modern chemists, they're not just making fire. They're operating what can only be described as a prehistoric chemical laboratory, using controlled combustion to create one of humanity's first manufactured materials. The discovery of this underground facility has revolutionized our understanding of Neanderthal technology. These weren't primitive cavemen banging rocks together. They were sophisticated engineers who understood complex principles of chemistry, thermodynamics, and material science that wouldn't be formally discovered by modern science for tens of thousands of years. The installation at Vanguard Cave represents the pinnacle of Neanderthal fire technology. Archaeologists found a carefully constructed hearth built into the cave floor, surrounded by charcoal and plant resin residue. The entire chamber was designed to maintain temperatures of exactly 300 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to break down birch bark into sticky tar, but not so hot as to burn the valuable resin. This level of temperature control required understanding of combustion principles that rivals modern industrial processes. The tar they produced wasn't just useful, it was revolutionary. This was the world's first known manufactured adhesive, a technological breakthrough that enabled the creation of composite tools and weapons far superior to anything that came before. Neanderthals used this tar to attach stone points to wooden shafts, creating spears and knives that were essentially the world's first high-tech weapons. But the Gibraltar discovery was just the beginning. Across Europe, archaeologists have found evidence of Neanderthal fire technology that demonstrates a level of sophistication that was previously unimaginable. They weren't just using fire for warmth and cooking. They were manipulating it with scientific precision to achieve specific technological goals. At sites throughout France, researchers have identified dozens of stone tools that show distinctive wear patterns from fire-making activities. Microscopic analysis reveals that these tools were repeatedly struck against pyrite iron sulfide to create sparks that could ignite tinder. This wasn't accidental fire-making. It was deliberate, controlled fire production on demand. The ability to make fire at will represents one of the most important technological achievements in human history. While other early human species may have learned to maintain fires that started naturally, Neanderthals mastered the much more difficult art of creating fire from scratch. This gave them enormous advantages during harsh winters when natural fires were rare and maintaining continuous flames was nearly impossible. Their fire-making tools required sophisticated understanding of material science. The stone implements they used show evidence of careful selection and preparation. Not just any rock would work. They needed stones with specific hardness and fracture, properties that can reliably produce sparks when struck against pyrite. The fact that these tools show evidence of repeated use over long periods suggests they were carefully maintained and valued possessions. But firemaking was just one aspect of Neanderthal mastery over combustion. They also used fire for advanced tool manufacturing in ways that wouldn't be seen again for tens of thousands of years. At Poggetti Vecchi in Italy, archaeologists found evidence that Neanderthals were using controlled fire to process wooden tools, heating the wood to specific temperatures to make it harder and more durable. The wooden implements from Poggetti Vecchi show clear evidence of sophisticated manufacturing processes. Neanderthals would select specific types of wood, preferring boxwood for its superior properties, then use fire to facilitate bark removal, harden tool points, and shape the wood into precisely engineered implements. This required understanding not just of fire technology, but of wood properties, tool design, and manufacturing processes. Their stone tool technology was equally revolutionary. Around 300,000 years ago, Neanderthals developed the Levelwall technique, a sophisticated method of tool production that required extensive planning and spatial reasoning. This wasn't simple knapping. It was precision engineering that produced tools of standardized size and shape with predictable performance characteristics. The Levelwall technique involved preparing a stone core through a series of carefully planned strikes, removing flakes from specific locations to create a three-dimensional template. Only when the core was perfectly prepared would the toolmaker strike a single blow to remove a finished tool blank. This blank could then be refined into specific implement types: scrapers for processing hides, points for spears, or cutting tools for butchery. The level of planning required for Levelwall tool production was extraordinary. Neanderthal toolmakers had to visualize the final product before beginning work, then execute a complex sequence of precise strikes to achieve their goal. Modern experimental archaeologists who have attempted to master this technique report that it requires years of training and practice to achieve proficiency. But Neanderthal tool technology went far beyond stone implements. They created the world's first composite tools implements made from multiple materials joined together with sophisticated adhesives. These composite tools represented a fundamental breakthrough in technology, allowing them to combine the best properties of different materials into single implements that outperformed anything made from a single material. The adhesives they used were marvels of prehistoric chemistry. Neanderthals heated birch bark under carefully controlled conditions to produce tar with specific viscosity and bonding properties. This process, called dry distillation, requires maintaining precise temperatures. Over extended periods, too cool and no tar is produced. Too hot and the bark simply burns. The fact that Neanderthals mastered this process demonstrates sophisticated understanding of chemical principles. Recent discoveries have revealed even more advanced adhesive technologies. Some Neanderthal sites show evidence of multi-component adhesives that combine tree resins, beeswax, and mineral additives to create glues with specific performance characteristics. These complex formulations required not just understanding of individual materials, but knowledge of how different substances interact when combined. The quality of Neanderthal composite tools was remarkable. Archaeological analysis shows that their hafted spears and knives were often superior to similar implements made by early modern humans. The adhesive bonds were so strong that many tools broke at the stone-wood interface rather than at the glue joint, indicating that their adhesives were actually stronger than the materials they were joining. Their tool maintenance and repair systems were equally sophisticated. Neanderthals developed techniques for resharpening stone tools, repairing damaged hafting, and recycling materials from broken implements. Some tools show evidence of multiple repair episodes, suggesting they were valued possessions that were maintained and used over extended periods. The diversity of their toolkit was staggering. Neanderthal sites contain evidence of over 40 different tool types, each designed for specific tasks. They made scrapers for processing animal hides, awls for punching holes in leather, burins for working wood and bone, and specialized tools for tasks we can only guess at. This level of specialization indicates not just technological sophistication, but complex understanding of task-specific tool requirements. But perhaps most remarkably, they were innovating right up until their extinction. Some of the most sophisticated Neanderthal technologies appear at sites dated to just before they disappeared, suggesting they were still developing new techniques and approaches even as their populations dwindled. The Chattelperonian industry, found at late Neanderthal sites in France and Spain, shows evidence of technological exchange with early modern humans. Neanderthals were adapting new blade-making techniques and incorporating design elements from modern human tools, demonstrating their ability to learn and innovate even under pressure. Their fire and stone technologies weren't just tools. They were the foundation of a complex technological system that enabled Neanderthals to thrive in Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. These technologies required not just individual skill, but complex systems of knowledge transfer, apprenticeship, and cultural tradition that could preserve and refine techniques over countless generations. The sophistication of Neanderthal technology challenges our assumptions about human cognitive evolution and technological development. These achievements required the same types of abstract reasoning, planning ability, and innovative thinking that we associate with modern human intelligence. In many cases, Neanderthal technologies were superior to those developed by early modern humans, suggesting that technological sophistication alone wasn't enough to ensure evolutionary success. Chapter 5. The Artists and Achialiers in a limestone cave in southern Spain. 65,000 years ago, a Neanderthal artist carefully mixes red ochre with fat, creating a rich pigment that glows like liquid fire in the flickering torchlight. With deliberate strokes, they begin painting abstract symbols on the cave wall lines, dots, and geometric patterns that speak to some deeper meaning we can only guess at. This moment, captured in the archaeological record, represents one of the most profound discoveries in human evolution. Neanderthals were creating art tens of thousands of years before modern humans arrived in Europe. The discovery of Neanderthal cave paintings has revolutionized our understanding of their cognitive abilities and cultural sophistication. These aren't crude finger paintings or accidental marks. They're deliberate artistic expressions that required planning, skill, and abstract thinking. The paintings at caves like Ardales, Maltravieso, and La Pasiga in Spain are the oldest known artworks created by any human species, predating modern human cave art by at least 20,000 years. But the artistic achievements of Neanderthals went far beyond cave painting. Archaeological sites across Europe have yielded evidence of a rich symbolic culture that included personal ornaments, decorative objects, and ritual behaviors that speak to a deeply human need for beauty and meaning. At Krapina in Croatia, archaeologists found eagle talons that had been deliberately modified into what can only be described as jewelry. These weren't random bones. They were carefully selected, shaped, and polished into ornamental objects that served no practical purpose except decoration. The fact that Neanderthals were creating jewelry 130,000 years ago suggests they had developed concepts of personal identity, status, and aesthetic beauty that we thought were unique to modern humans. The use of pigments by Neanderthals was even more widespread and sophisticated than their cave art suggests. Over 70 Neanderthal sites across Europe contain evidence of ochre and manganese oxide use, with some sites yielding hundreds of pigment fragments showing clear signs of use. At Pec de Lazy in France, archaeologists found over 500 black pigment fragments, half of which showed telltale signs of grinding, mixing, And application. These pigments weren't just used for cave painting. Evidence suggests Neanderthals were applying colors to their own bodies, their tools, and their living spaces. Some researchers believe they were creating the world's first cosmetics, using red ochre and other minerals to paint their skin for ceremonial or practical purposes. The fact that they sometimes transported pigments over distances of dozens of kilometers indicates these materials held special significance that went far beyond mere utility. Perhaps even more remarkable was their apparent fascination with rare and beautiful objects. Neanderthal sites contain collections of fossils, unusual stones, and crystal formations that serve no practical purpose but were apparently valued for their intrinsic beauty or uniqueness. These Manaport objects, deliberately moved by humans, represent some of the earliest evidence of aesthetic appreciation in human evolution. At the Grotte du Renne in France, archaeologists found evidence that Neanderthals were collecting and modifying shells, teeth, and other objects into what can only be described as an early form of art collection. Some of these objects show evidence of deliberate modification: holes drilled for suspension, surfaces polished to enhance their appearance, or decorative engravings that transformed functional objects into artistic expressions. But the most extraordinary evidence of Neanderthal symbolic behavior comes from the Bruniquel Cave in southwestern France. Deep underground, 176,000 years ago, Neanderthals constructed mysterious circular structures from deliberately broken stalagmites. These installations, containing over 400 pieces of cave formations arranged in precise geometric patterns, represent the earliest known architectural constructions by any human species. The Bruniquel structures required enormous effort and planning. Neanderthals had to venture deep into the cave system, far from natural light, carrying torches to illuminate their work. They deliberately broke stalagmites into specific lengths, then arranged them into two large elliptical structures and several smaller accumulations. The purpose of these installations remains mysterious, but their very existence demonstrates the Neanderthals were capable of complex spatial reasoning and symbolic thinking. Even more touching is the evidence of Neanderthal compassion and medical care. At the Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologists found the remains of a Neanderthal man who had suffered multiple injuries throughout his life: a withered arm, blindness in one eye, and severe head trauma that would have left him partially disabled. Yet he lived to an advanced age, dying in his 40s or 50s, which was elderly by Neanderthal standards. He could only have survived with extensive care and support from his community. This pattern of caring for disabled and elderly community members appears repeatedly in the Neanderthal archaeological record. At La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, researchers found the remains of an elderly Neanderthal man who suffered from severe arthritis and had lost most of his teeth. He would have been unable to hunt or even chew tough foods, yet he lived for years. In this condition, clearly cared for by others who provided him with soft foods and protection. Perhaps most remarkably, recent research has identified a 6-year-old Neanderthal child nicknamed Tina, who had Down syndrome. The child lived to age 6 impossible without extensive community care, patience, and acceptance. This discovery suggests that Neanderthal communities not only cared for their disabled members but fully integrated them into their social groups. The medical knowledge of Neanderthals extended beyond simple care giving to actual therapeutic treatments. At several sites, archaeologists have found evidence that Neanderthals were using medicinal plants and possibly even performing primitive surgical procedures. Chemical analysis of Neanderthal teeth has revealed traces of yarrow and chamomile, plants with no nutritional value but well-known medicinal properties. At the El Sidrón site in Spain, researchers found evidence that Neanderthals were treating dental problems with natural remedies. Chemical analysis of calcified plaque on their teeth revealed traces of plants that are still used today for treating tooth pain and infections. This suggests they had developed sophisticated understanding of which plants could be used to treat specific ailments. The burial practices of Neanderthals provide some of the most compelling evidence of their humanity and spiritual beliefs. At sites across Europe and the Middle East, archaeologists have found clear evidence that Neanderthals were deliberately burying their dead, a practice that no other animal species exhibits, and that seems to be uniquely human. The most famous example comes from the Shanidar cave, where researchers found evidence that a Neanderthal had been buried with flowers. Pollen analysis revealed traces of specific flowering plants that don't grow naturally in the cave, suggesting they were deliberately placed with the body. While some researchers debate whether these flowers were intentionally placed or arrived by other means, the pattern of deliberate burial at Neanderthal sites is undeniable. At La Forêt in France, archaeologists found evidence of a Neanderthal cemetery where multiple individuals had been buried over time. The bodies were placed in carefully dug graves, often in specific positions that suggest ritual significance. Some were buried with stone tools or other grave goods, indicating belief in an afterlife where these objects might be needed. The emotional capacity of Neanderthals is perhaps best illustrated by evidence of their response to death and injury. At several sites, researchers have found signs that Neanderthals mourned their dead and performed rituals around death and burial. Some burials show evidence of repeated visits, with additional objects placed with the deceased over time. Even their response to violence and conflict shows a deeply human side. While Neanderthal sites do show evidence of violence, broken bones from fights, embedded weapon points, and other signs of conflict, they also show extensive evidence of healing and recovery. Many individuals who suffered severe injuries lived for years afterward, suggesting their communities were willing to invest enormous resources in caring for wounded members. The artistic and healing traditions of Neanderthals weren't isolated behaviors, but part of a complex cultural system that included music, storytelling, and spiritual beliefs. At Divjubab in Slovenia, archaeologists found what may be the world's oldest musical instrument, a bare femur with holes that appeared to have been deliberately created to produce specific musical tones. While some researchers debate whether this is truly a flute or the result of carnivore activity, the positioning of the holes suggests deliberate musical construction. Evidence suggests that Neanderthal artistic and healing traditions were passed down through generations via complex cultural transmission systems. Young Neanderthals would learn not just hunting and tool-making skills from their elders, but also artistic techniques, medical knowledge, and spiritual practices that connected them to their ancestors and their environment. The sophistication of Neanderthal symbolic behavior challenges our understanding of what makes us uniquely human. For decades, scientists believed that art, music, and spiritual beliefs were characteristics that separated modern humans from all other species. The discovery that Neanderthals possessed these same capacities forces us to reconsider our assumptions about consciousness, creativity, and the nature of human intelligence. Their artistic achievements were all the more remarkable, given the harsh conditions of their environment. Creating cave paintings, crafting jewelry, and constructing symbolic monuments required time and energy that could have been devoted to survival activities. The fact that Neanderthals chose to invest in these pursuits suggests they had moved beyond mere survival to achieve something approaching what we might call civilization. Chapter 6. WHEN. Two worlds. The year is 47,000 BCE. In a valley that will one day become Israel and Palestine. The morning sun illuminates two very different groups of humans as they encounter each other for what may be the first time. On one side of a small river stand the Neanderthal stocky, powerful, perfectly adapted to this land they've called home for hundreds of thousands of years. Their tools are sophisticated, their knowledge of the terrain encyclopedic, their survival skills honed by countless generations of ancestors. On the other side are the newcomers from Africa, taller, leaner, traveling in larger groups than the Neanderthals have ever seen. They carry strange new weapons, speak in unfamiliar languages, and display technologies that seem both primitive and advanced in different ways. Their faces show the curiosity and wariness of explorers in a new land, but also the confidence of a species that has recently mastered new ways of thinking and organizing. This encounter, playing out in what archaeologists call the Levanten corridor, represents one of the most significant moments in human history. These aren't just two groups of early humans meeting. These are two entirely different evolutionary experiments in what it means to be human, coming face to face after hundreds of thousands of years of separate development. What neither group could possibly realize is that this meeting will set in motion a chain of events that will reshape the entire human story. Over the next 20,000 years, these two species will interbreed, compete, cooperate, share technologies, and exchange genes in patterns so complex that modern geneticists are still working to untangle them. Ultimately, one species will survive and spread across the globe, while the other will disappear forever, except for the genetic traces that live on in billions of people today. Recent genetic research has revealed that this wasn't just one meeting, or even one wave of contact. Modern humans and Neanderthals encountered each other repeatedly over a period of more than 200,000 years, creating one of the most intricate evolutionary stories ever uncovered. Using advanced artificial intelligence and genetic analysis, researchers led by Joshua Aki at Princeton University have mapped 3 distinct waves of contact between these species, each with its own unique characteristics and consequences. First wave occurred astonishingly early, between 200,000 and 250,000 years ago. This discovery completely overturned previous assumptions about when modern humans first left Africa and encountered other human species. These early contacts were apparently limited in scope, involving small groups of modern humans who ventured north from Africa and encountered Neanderthal populations that had already been established in the Middle East for hundreds of thousands of years. The second wave, occurring around 100,000 to 120,000 years ago, was more substantial but still limited in geographic scope. Archaeological evidence from sites like Kafsian Skull in Israel shows that modern humans and Neanderthals were living in the same regions during this period, using similar tools and adapting to the same environmental challenges. However, genetic analysis suggests that the offspring of these early encounters predominantly remained with Neanderthal populations rather than modern human groups. The third and most significant wave began around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago and lasted for approximately 7,000 years. This period of sustained contact occurred as modern humans began their major expansion out of Africa and into Eurasia. Unlike the earlier encounters, this contact period involved substantial gene flow in both directions and had lasting impacts on both species. The precision with which scientists can now date these interactions is remarkable. Analysis of ancient DNA from 58 early modern human skeletons found across Eurasia, combined with genetic data from 2,000 living humans, has pinpointed the peak period of interbreeding to around 47,000 years ago. This level of genetic detective work was impossible just a decade ago, but advances in ancient DNA extraction and analysis have opened entirely new windows into our evolutionary past. The geographic scope of these contacts was vast. Evidence of Neanderthal modern human interaction has been found from Spain in the west to Siberia in the east, and from Belgium in the north to the Mediterranean coast in the south. This wasn't isolated contact in a single region. it was a continent-wide phenomenon that played out differently in different locations over thousands of years. In some regions, the contact appears to have been relatively peaceful, with evidence of technological exchange and sustained coexistence. The Chattel-Peronian industry, found at sites in France and Spain, shows clear evidence of Neanderthals adopting tool-making techniques from modern humans. Similarly, some early modern human sites show evidence of Neanderthal-style tools and techniques, suggesting bidirectional cultural exchange. But the story of contact wasn't always peaceful. Archaeological evidence from some sites suggests periods of conflict and competition for resources. At certain locations, Neanderthal and modern human occupation layers alternate, suggesting that control of prime territories changed hands multiple times. The pattern of replacement wasn't uniform in some areas. Modern humans quickly displaced Neanderthal populations, while in others, the two species coexisted for thousands of years. One of the most significant factors in these interactions was disease transmission. Stanford researchers have proposed that complex disease patterns may explain both why contact was sustained for so long and why modern humans ultimately replaced Neanderthals. The disease barrier hypothesis suggests that each species carried pathogens that were devastating to the other, creating invisible barriers that limited interaction and maintained an uneasy equilibrium for tens of thousands of years. Modern humans arriving from tropical Africa would have carried diseases that Neanderthals had never encountered and thus had no immunity against. Conversely, Neanderthals harbored pathogens adapted to temperate climates that could have been deadly to modern human populations. This disease burden may have created contact zones where interaction was possible but risky, limiting the extent and nature of encounters between the two species. The hypothesis suggests that what eventually broke this equilibrium was interbreeding itself. Hybrid individuals born from Neanderthal-modern human unions would have inherited immune genes from both species, gradually spreading disease resistance through both populations. As immunity increased over generations, the barriers to contact would have decreased, eventually allowing modern humans to expand into previously dangerous Neanderthal territories. The genetic evidence for interbreeding is now overwhelming. Every person of non-African ancestry carries between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA, representing thousands of genetic variants inherited from our ancient cousins. Interestingly, the amount of Neanderthal ancestry varies between different modern populations, with East Asians typically carrying slightly more Neanderthal DNA than Europeans, but the genetic exchange wasn't symmetrical. While modern humans retain substantial Neanderthal ancestry, analysis of late Neanderthal genomes shows virtually no modern human DNA. This asymmetry suggests that hybrid individuals predominantly joined modern human populations rather than Neanderthal groups. Several factors could explain this pattern. Hybrid individuals might not have been accepted in Neanderthal societies, or modern human groups might have been more welcoming to newcomers, or demographic factors might have favored integration into the larger modern human population. The technological exchanges between these species were equally complex. Some of the most sophisticated Neanderthal technologies appear at sites dating to the period of contact with modern humans. The Chattel-Peronian industry shows clear influence from modern human blade-making techniques, but adapted to Neanderthal tool-making traditions and preferences. This wasn't simple copying. It was creative synthesis that combined elements from both traditions. Similarly, some early modern human technologies show Neanderthal influence. Certain hafting techniques, adhesive formulations, and tool designs appear to have been adopted from Neanderthal innovations. This bidirectional technology transfer suggests that both species recognized and appreciated superior techniques, regardless of their origin. The social dynamics of these encounters must have been incredibly complex. Modern humans and Neanderthals had different group sizes, social structures, and cultural traditions. Modern humans typically lived in larger groups with more extensive social networks, while Neanderthals lived in smaller, more tightly knit communities. When these different social systems encountered each other, the results would have varied dramatically depending on local circumstances, resource availability, and the personalities of individual leaders. Language barriers would have presented additional challenges. While both species almost certainly had complex communication systems, their languages would have been completely different after hundreds of thousands of years of separate evolution. Initial encounters would have relied heavily on gestures, demonstrations, and gradual development of pidgin communication systems. Despite these challenges, the evidence for sustained peaceful contact is substantial. Sites like Riparo Messina in Italy show evidence of modern humans and Neanderthals living in the same caves during the same time periods, sharing hearths and tool-making areas. This level of intimacy suggests not just peaceful coexistence, but active cooperation and integration. The demographic factors underlying these encounters were crucial to their outcomes. Modern human populations were generally larger and had higher birth rates than Neanderthal groups. They also had more extensive trade networks and social connections. That allowed them to draw resources and support from distant groups. These advantages became increasingly important as environmental conditions became more challenging. Neanderthal populations, meanwhile, were smaller and more isolated. Recent genetic analysis of a Neanderthal nicknamed Thorn from France's reign Valley revealed that some Neanderthal groups had been isolated for thousands of years, even from other Neanderthal populations living just a few weeks' walk away. This genetic isolation made them more vulnerable to demographic fluctuations and reduced their ability to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. The timing of these encounters was also crucial. The major period of contact occurred during a time of significant climate instability, with rapid switches between warm and cold periods that stressed both species. Modern humans, with their larger populations and more flexible social systems, were better able to adapt to these changes and support each other through difficult periods. The ultimate outcome of these encounters was the gradual replacement of Neanderthal populations by modern humans across Europe and Asia. But this wasn't a sudden conquest. It was a gradual process that took thousands of years and varied significantly from region to region. In some areas, like southern Spain, Neanderthal populations may have persisted until as recently as 32,000 years ago, long after they had disappeared from other parts of Europe. The genetic legacy of these encounters is permanent and ongoing. Every person of non-African ancestry is essentially a hybrid, carrying genetic contributions from both modern human and Neanderthal ancestors. These Neanderthal genes continue to influence human health, appearance, and behavior in ways that scientists are still discovering. Chapter 7. The Disease WRest, deep in the laboratories of Stanford University. Researchers are using mathematical models to solve one of the greatest mysteries in human evolution. Why did it take nearly 100,000 years after first contact for modern humans to replace Neanderthals? The answer they've discovered is as invisible as it is deadly, a biological warfare of pathogens and immunity that created barriers between species, more formidable than any mountain range or desert. The disease war between modern humans and Neanderthals wasn't fought with weapons or strategies that either species could see or understand. It was waged by microscopic organisms, bacteria, viruses, and parasites that had evolved alongside each human lineage for hundreds of thousands of years. These tiny biological weapons would prove more decisive than any stone spear or hunting technique in determining which human species would inherit the Earth. When the first modern humans ventured out of Africa around 100,000 years ago, they carried with them an invisible arsenal of tropical diseases. Having evolved in the pathogen-rich environments of equatorial Africa, their immune systems had been tested and strengthened by exposure to a vast array of infectious organisms. Malaria, sleeping sickness, yellow fever, and dozens of other tropical diseases had shaped their genetic defenses over countless generations. Neanderthals, meanwhile, had spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting to the very different pathogen environment of Ice Age Europe and Western Asia. They had developed immunity to temperate climate diseases, respiratory infections adapted to cold conditions, and pathogens specific to the animals they hunted and the environments they inhabited. Their immune systems were perfectly tuned to their world, but completely naive to the biological threats that modern humans carried in their blood. Stanford researcher Diehl Greenbaum and his colleagues have used sophisticated mathematical models to simulate how these disease dynamics would have played out over tens of thousands of years. Their research, published in Nature Communications, suggests that disease transmission created an invisible barrier that explains one of the most puzzling aspects of Neanderthal-modern human interaction: why peaceful coexistence was possible for so long before one species finally replaced the other. The models reveal that when two human populations with different disease burdens meet, they create what epidemiologists call a disease barrier zone. In this zone, movement in either direction becomes extremely dangerous because individuals entering foreign territory are exposed to pathogens for which they have no immunity. This barrier can maintain population separation for thousands of years, even when both groups would benefit from interaction and resource sharing. Archaeological evidence supports this disease barrier hypothesis. The Levantine Corridor, the region encompassing modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria, shows evidence of repeated back-and-forth movement between Neanderthal and modern human populations over tens of thousands of years. Sometimes modern humans controlled the region, sometimes Neanderthals, but neither group seemed able to push far beyond this central contact zone for extended periods. This pattern is exactly what the disease models predict. The Levant became a mixing zone where both populations could survive, because they gradually developed partial immunity to each other's diseases through limited contact and interbreeding. But venturing beyond this zone in either direction, north into core Neanderthal territory or south into Africa, remained deadly for many thousands of years. The tropical diseases that modern humans carried were particularly devastating to Neanderthal populations. Having evolved in Africa, these pathogens were adapted to warm climates and dense populations. While they might have been less virulent in the cooler European environment, they would still have been deadly to Neanderthal immune systems that had never encountered anything like them. Vector-borne diseases would have been especially problematic. Modern humans carried genetic resistances to malaria, sleeping sickness, and other diseases transmitted by insects. When they moved north, they brought these pathogens with them, along with the insects that transmitted them. Neanderthal populations encountering these diseases for the first time would have faced devastating epidemics. But the disease exchange wasn't one-sided. Neanderthals harbored their own arsenal of pathogens that would have been equally deadly to modern human populations. Respiratory diseases adapted to cold climates, zoonotic infections from the large mammals that Neanderthals specialized in hunting, and endemic diseases specific to European environments would have created significant barriers to modern human expansion. The mathematical models suggest that even small differences in disease burden between the two populations would have created enormous barriers to movement and expansion. A pathogen that killed just 5% of a naive population would be enough to prevent successful colonization attempts. Given that some diseases can have mortality rates of 30 to 50% in populations with no prior exposure, the barriers to expansion would have been nearly insurmountable for most of the contact period. What eventually broke down these disease barriers was a process that took tens of thousands of years: gradual immune adaptation through interbreeding and limited contact. Every hybrid individual born from Neanderthal modern human unions carried immune genes from both lineages. These hybrid individuals were essentially living laboratories where different immune strategies could be tested and combined over generations. Beneficial immune genes from both species spread through the contact populations. Modern humans acquired Neanderthal immune adaptations that helped them survive in European environments, while Neanderthals gained some resistance to modern human diseases. This gradual process of immune mixing slowly reduced the lethality of cross-population contact. The genetic evidence for this process is written in the DNA of everyone alive today. Many of the Neanderthal genes that persist in modern human populations are related to immune function. These genetic variants helped early modern humans survive in non-African environments and continue to influence disease resistance today. Some Neanderthal immune genes that were beneficial in Ice Age Europe now contribute to autoimmune diseases in modern populations. Variants that once protected against ancient infections now increase susceptibility to allergies, inflammatory diseases, and other immune-related conditions. This shows how disease resistance that was adaptive in one environment can become problematic. When conditions change, the timing of the final breakdown of disease barriers correlates closely with the period when modern humans began successfully expanding across Europe. Around 45,000 years ago, modern human populations started moving rapidly across the continent, establishing permanent settlements in regions that had been Neanderthal strongholds for hundreds of thousands of years. This expansion wasn't gradual, it was remarkably rapid, suggesting that some fundamental barrier to movement had been removed. The disease barrier hypothesis provides a compelling explanation. Once sufficient immune mixing had occurred through interbreeding, the biological obstacles to expansion suddenly disappeared, allowing modern humans to spread across Europe in just a few thousand years. The speed of this expansion also explains why Neanderthal replacement was so rapid once it began. With disease barriers reduced, modern human populations could move freely across the landscape, establishing settlements in optimal locations and exploiting resources that had previously been inaccessible. Their larger population sizes and more extensive social networks gave them decisive advantages once biological barriers were removed. But the disease wars had lasting consequences that extended far beyond the replacement of Neanderthal populations. The genetic mixing that occurred during the long contact period fundamentally altered both species. Modern humans gained crucial adaptations for surviving in non-African environments, while Neanderthals, in their final generations, carried genetic contributions from modern human ancestors. The immune diversity that resulted from this ancient genetic mixing continues to benefit human populations today. The Neanderthal immune genes that modern humans carry provide resistance to diseases that our purely African ancestors would have been vulnerable to. This genetic heritage has been crucial for human survival in temperate and Arctic environments. However, this same genetic mixing also created new vulnerabilities. Some modern human diseases may have resulted from the combination of Neanderthal and modern human genetic variants in ways that neither ancestral population experienced. The complex inheritance patterns of immune genes mean that some combinations that are beneficial in isolation can be problematic when combined. The disease war hypothesis also helps explain why some modern human populations carry more Neanderthal DNA than others. East Asian populations typically have higher levels of Neanderthal ancestry than Europeans, possibly because their ancestors encountered different Neanderthal populations with different disease burdens, or because environmental pressures in Asia Favored retention of Neanderthal genetic variants. Recent research has identified specific Neanderthal genetic variants that influence susceptibility to modern diseases, including COVID-19. Some Neanderthal variants increase severity of coronavirus infections, while others provide protection. This shows how ancient disease encounters continue to influence human health tens of thousands of years later. The invisible war of pathogens and immunity may have been more decisive in shaping human evolution than any visible conflict or competition. While we often focus on tools, hunting strategies, and cultural differences between human species, the microscopic battles fought by immune systems may have been the ultimate determining factor in which lineages survived and which disappeared. Understanding these ancient disease dynamics has implications for modern global health. As human populations become increasingly connected, we face similar challenges in managing pathogen transmission between populations with different immune histories. The lessons from Neanderthal modern human disease interactions provide insights into how diseases spread, how immunity develops, and how long-term coexistence between different populations is possible despite biological barriers. The disease wars between Neanderthals and modern humans remind us that evolution operates at multiple levels simultaneously. While we see the dramatic changes in tools, art, and culture, equally important changes were occurring in the invisible realm of immune function and disease resistance. The outcome of human evolution was determined not just by who had the best spears or the most sophisticated social organization, but by whose immune system was better prepared for the biological challenges of a changing world. Chapter 8. Cultural exchange in a cave overlooking the Dordogne River in southwestern France. 35,000 years ago, something unprecedented is happening. A young Neanderthal toolmaker sits beside a fire, carefully watching as a modern human demonstrates a new technique for creating razor-sharp stone blades. The tools being made are unlike anything in the traditional Neanderthal toolkit, longer, thinner, and more efficient than the robust implements their ancestors had perfected over hundreds of thousands of years. This scene represents one of the most remarkable aspects of late Neanderthal culture: their ability to learn, adapt, and innovate even in the face of demographic pressure and environmental change. Rather than rigidly adhering to ancient traditions, the last Neanderthals were cultural innovators who absorbed new technologies, created hybrid techniques, and developed entirely new approaches to toolmaking and survival. The archaeological evidence for this cultural exchange comes from a revolutionary industry called the Chalperonian, named after the site of Chalperon in central France, where it was first identified. This technology represents something unprecedented in the archaeological record: a fusion of Neanderthal and modern human toolmaking traditions that created implements superior to ancestral technology. Chalperonian tools were made using a sophisticated blade technology that required tremendous skill and planning. Unlike the traditional Neanderthal approach of creating tools from thick flakes struck from prepared cores, blade technology involved removing long, thin pieces of stone that could be further shaped into a variety of specialized implements. This technique was far more efficient, producing much more cutting edge per unit of raw material. But the Chalperonian wasn't simply copied from modern human techniques. Neanderthal toolmakers adapted the blade technology to their own needs and preferences, creating hybrid tools that combine the efficiency of modern human designs with the robusticity and specialized functions that had made Neanderthal implements so effective. The result was a toolkit that was both innovative and distinctively Neanderthal. The most characteristic tool of the Chalperonian tradition was a curved-back knife that combined blade technology with traditional Neanderthal design elements. These knives were incredibly sharp and efficient, but also robust enough to handle the heavy-duty tasks that Neanderthal lifestyle required. The combination of modern technique with traditional form created tools that were perfectly adapted to late Neanderthal needs. Archaeological analysis has confirmed that these sophisticated tools were indeed made by Neanderthals, not modern humans. The Chattelperronian industry appears at sites where only Neanderthal remains have been found, and the tools show wear patterns consistent with Neanderthal use patterns and lifestyle requirements. This definitively establishes that Neanderthals were capable of learning and adapting advanced technologies from other human species. But the cultural exchange went beyond simple technology transfer. Neanderthal sites from this period show evidence of new approaches to resource management, food processing, and even artistic expression that suggest broader cultural influences from contact with modern humans. Some late Neanderthal sites contain bone tools, personal ornaments, and symbolic objects that are rare or absent in earlier Neanderthal context. At Grotte du Renne in France, one of the most important late Neanderthal sites, archaeologists found evidence of sophisticated bone tool technology that appears to have been adapted from modern human techniques. These bone tools were precisely shaped and polished, showing a level of craftsmanship that rivals the best modern human bone work from the same period. The same site yielded personal ornaments that suggest Neanderthals were adopting and adapting modern human approaches to symbolic expression. Perforated animal teeth, carved bone fragments, and modified shells found at Chattelperronian sites indicate that late Neanderthals were creating personal ornaments and possibly engaging in symbolic communication. Perhaps most remarkably, some late Neanderthal sites show evidence of new hunting strategies and prey selection patterns that suggest influence from modern human techniques. While earlier Neanderthals were primarily big game specialists who focused on large mammals, some late Neanderthal sites show increased exploitation of smaller game, birds, and aquatic resources strategies that were more characteristic of modern human populations. This diversification of hunting strategies may have been crucial for Neanderthal survival during the challenging environmental conditions of their final millennia. As large game became scarcer due to climate change and competition from modern human hunters, the ability to exploit a broader range of resources would have provided significant survival advantages. The speed with which Neanderthals adopted and adapted new technologies challenges stereotypes about their cognitive abilities and cultural flexibility. These weren't primitive beings rigidly locked into ancient ways of doing things. They were intelligent, adaptable people who could recognize superior techniques and quickly incorporate them into their own cultural traditions. Experimental archaeology has shown that mastering blade technology requires years of practice and instruction. The fact that Neanderthals were able to learn these techniques and then modify them to suit their own needs demonstrates sophisticated understanding of stone, tool mechanics, and remarkable cultural transmission abilities. But the cultural exchange wasn't unidirectional. Archaeological evidence suggests that modern humans also adopted some Neanderthal techniques and approaches, particularly in regions where contact between the two species was extensive. Some early modern human sites show tool types and manufacturing techniques that appear to have Neanderthal influence. The hafting techniques that Neanderthals had perfected over hundreds of thousands of years were particularly influential. Modern humans adopted Neanderthal methods for attaching stone points to wooden shafts, including the sophisticated adhesive technologies that Neanderthals had developed for creating composite tools. Some modern human sites from the contact period show evidence of Neanderthal-style food processing techniques, including the bone grease extraction methods that Neanderthals had perfected. These energy-intensive but highly productive food processing strategies were particularly valuable during harsh winter months, when fresh resources were scarce. The evidence for cultural exchange also includes more subtle influences that are harder to detect archaeologically, but may have been equally important. Language borrowing, knowledge of local environments, understanding of seasonal patterns, and familiarity with regional resources would have been valuable forms of cultural exchange that might not leave clear archaeological signatures. Modern humans entering Europe would have benefited enormously from Neanderthal knowledge of local conditions. Neanderthals had hundreds of thousands of years of experience with European environments, including detailed understanding of climate patterns, animal behavior, plant resources, and optimal locations for settlement and resource extraction. Conversely, modern humans brought new social technologies and organizational strategies that may have influenced late Neanderthal cultural practices. The larger group sizes and more extensive social networks that characterized modern human societies could have provided models for new forms of cooperation and resource sharing. The artistic traditions that emerged during the contact period show evidence of mutual influence. While Neanderthal cave art predates modern human arrival in Europe, the artistic traditions that developed during the contact period show stylistic elements that may reflect cultural exchange between the two species. Some cave art sites show evidence of use by both Neanderthals and modern humans, with different artistic styles and techniques appearing in the same caves over time. These sites suggest that knowledge of specific locations and their significance was passed between groups, possibly through direct contact or through hybrid populations that maintained connections to both communities. The musical traditions that may have existed during this period also show evidence of cultural fusion. While the evidence for Neanderthal music is limited, some researchers suggest that the bone flute found at Divya Babe in Slovenia shows technological influences that could reflect contact with modern human musical traditions. Trading relationships between Neanderthal and modern human groups are suggested by the distribution of raw materials at archaeological sites. Some late Neanderthal sites contain stone tool materials that originated hundreds of kilometers away, patterns that are more characteristic of modern human trade networks than traditional Neanderthal resource procurement strategies. The genetic evidence for cultural exchange comes from analysis of both ancient and modern DNA. The patterns of Neanderthal genetic inheritance in modern human populations suggest sustained contact and cooperation rather than simple conquest or replacement. The fact that beneficial Neanderthal genetic variants were preserved and spread through modern human populations indicates that interbreeding occurred in contexts where hybrid individuals were accepted and successful. Some of the most sophisticated late Neanderthal technologies appear at sites that also show evidence of modern human presence or influence. This correlation suggests that technological innovation during this period was driven at least partly by cultural contact and competition between the two species. The Eleusinian industry of southern Italy represents another example of technological fusion during the contact period. Like the Chattel-Peronian, the Eleusinian combines elements from both Neanderthal and modern human traditions, creating tools that are more sophisticated than either ancestral technology. While there's debate about whether Neanderthals or modern humans were primarily responsible for the Eleusinian, the technology clearly represents cultural synthesis between the two groups. In Central Europe, the Silesian industry shows similar patterns of technological fusion. These bifacial tools combine traditional Neanderthal robusticity with blade technology elements that appear to have been borrowed from modern human traditions. The geographic distribution of Silesian technology corresponds closely with regions where Neanderthal and modern human populations are known to have overlapped. The speed and extent of cultural exchange during the contact period demonstrates that both species possess sophisticated learning abilities and cultural transmission systems. The fact that new technologies could spread across hundreds of kilometers within a few thousand years indicates well-developed communication networks and cultural institutions, capable of preserving and sharing complex technical knowledge. Language played a crucial role in facilitating cultural exchange. Though the details of how Neanderthal and modern human communication systems interacted remain mysterious. Both species almost certainly had complex vocal communication, but their languages would have been completely different after hundreds of thousands of years of separate evolution. The development of pidgin communication systems would have been essential for sustained cultural exchange. Archaeological evidence suggests that contact between the two species was extensive enough to allow for the development of shared communication protocols that could facilitate technology transfer and cultural learning. The social implications of cultural exchange were enormous. For Neanderthal communities that had maintained traditional ways of life for hundreds of thousands of years, the rapid adoption of new technologies and cultural practices would have created significant social tensions and required fundamental changes in education, social organization, and cultural identity. Older Neanderthal community members who had spent their entire lives perfecting traditional techniques might have resisted new approaches, while younger individuals might have been more willing to experiment with innovative methods. This generational tension could have contributed to the social stress that Neanderthal communities experienced during their final millennia. The evidence for cultural exchange also raises important questions about Neanderthal agency and decision-making during the contact period. Rather than being passive victims of modern human expansion, late Neanderthal populations were actively adapting, innovating, and making strategic choices about which new technologies and cultural practices to adopt. Some Neanderthal groups may have chosen to maintain traditional lifestyles, while others embraced innovation and change. This variation in response to cultural contact could explain why Neanderthal extinction was gradual and regionally variable, rather than sudden and uniform across their range. The cultural exchange between Neanderthals and modern humans represents one of the most remarkable examples of interspecies cooperation and learning in the archaeological record. Despite their evolutionary differences and competitive pressures, both species were able to recognize and adopt superior technologies and cultural practices from each other. This cultural flexibility and willingness to learn from others may have been one of the most important factors determining which human lineages were able to survive and adapt to changing conditions. The ability to incorporate new ideas and techniques from external sources provided crucial advantages in rapidly changing environments. The legacy of this cultural exchange lives on in modern human technology and culture. Many of the techniques and approaches that modern humans use today can trace their origins back to innovations that emerged during the contact period between Neanderthals and early modern humans. The composite tool technologies, adhesive formulations, and resource management strategies that were perfected during this period became foundations for later technological development. Understanding the cultural exchange between Neanderthals and modern humans also provides insights into how innovation and cultural change occur in human societies. The contact period demonstrates that some of the most significant technological advances can emerge from the meeting and synthesis of different cultural traditions rather than from innovation within isolated groups. Chapter 9. The Last Esteron J. Chol as the sun sets over the limestone cliffs of Gibraltar 32,000 years ago. A small band of Neanderthals tends a fire at the mouth of Gorm's cave. They may not realize it, but they are among the very last of their kind, perhaps the final Neanderthal family anywhere on Earth. Outside their cave, the world has fundamentally changed. Modern humans now dominate the landscapes that Neanderthals once ruled, bringing with them new technologies, larger populations, and different ways of organizing society. For these lost Neanderthals, survival has become a daily struggle against forces they can barely comprehend. Their traditional hunting grounds have been claimed by the newcomers. The large game they specialized in hunting has become scarce, either from climate change or competition from modern human hunters. Their small population sizes mean that finding mates has become increasingly difficult, and genetic isolation has begun to take its toll. Yet these final Neanderthals are not giving up without a fight. Archaeological evidence from Gibraltar and other late Neanderthal sites shows that they continued to innovate, adapt, and struggle for survival right up until their final extinction. Their story is not one of passive decline, but of a desperate and ultimately tragic battle against overwhelming odds. Gibraltar represents the most important of the Neanderthal last strongholds, a refuge where they may have survived thousands of years longer than anywhere else in Europe. The unique geography and climate of this southern tip of Spain provided conditions that were particularly favorable for Neanderthal survival during the challenging final millennia of their existence. The limestone caves of Gibraltar offered excellent shelter, with stable temperatures year-round and protection from both weather and predators. The Mediterranean climate was warmer and more stable than the harsh conditions that prevailed further north, where Neanderthal populations had already disappeared. The coastal location provided access to marine resources that could supplement traditional hunting when land animals became scarce. But perhaps most importantly, Gibraltar's position at the southern tip of Europe may have made it less accessible to expanding modern human populations. The narrow peninsula could be defended with relatively small numbers, and the specialized knowledge required to survive in this unique environment would have given resident Neanderthal populations significant advantages over newcomers. Archaeological excavations at Gorham's Cave and nearby sites have revealed evidence of sophisticated Neanderthal technologies that were still being developed and refined right up until their extinction. The tar production facility discovered at Vanguard Cave dates to around 65,000 years ago, but evidence suggests that similar technologies were still being used by late Neanderthal populations. The tool assemblages from Gibraltar's late Neanderthal sites show continued innovation and adaptation. Rather than clinging rigidly to traditional techniques, these final populations were experimenting with new approaches, modifying their tools for changing conditions, and developing specialized implements for exploiting new types of resources. Marine resource exploitation appears to have become increasingly important for Gibraltar's late Neanderthal populations. Evidence from the caves shows increased consumption of shellfish, seabirds, and marine mammals resources that earlier Neanderthal populations had largely ignored. This dietary shift represents a fundamental adaptation to changing conditions. And resource availability. The shift toward marine resources wasn't just opportunistic, it required developing entirely new technologies and techniques. Neanderthals had to learn how to predict tides, identify productive shellfish beds, develop specialized tools for marine hunting, and process marine foods in ways that maximize their nutritional value. But Gibraltar wasn't the only Neanderthal refuge during their final millennia. Archaeological evidence suggests that isolated populations persisted in several refugia across southern Europe, each adapted to unique local conditions and challenges. In southern Spain, Neanderthal sites like Zafaria Cave show evidence of late survival in mountainous regions that may have been less attractive to modern human populations. The rugged terrain and specialized knowledge required to survive in these environments may have provided temporary protection from competitive pressures. The Iberian Peninsula as a whole appears to have served as a major refugium for late Neanderthal populations. The diverse environments, relatively stable climate, and geographic barriers may have allowed multiple small populations to persist longer than elsewhere in Europe. In Italy, late Neanderthal sites suggest that populations survived in the southern regions of the peninsula, possibly taking advantage of the peninsula's geographic isolation and diverse environments. The Apennine Mountains may have provided refugia similar to those in Spain, offering protection and specialized environments that favored Neanderthal survival strategies. Some researchers have proposed that Neanderthal populations may have persisted in the Balkans and even in Crimea, taking advantage of the geographic complexity and environmental diversity of these regions. However, the archaeological evidence for very late Neanderthal survival in these areas remains controversial and requires further investigation. The genetic evidence from these late Neanderthal populations tells a sobering story of increasing isolation and inbreeding. Analysis of DNA from Thorin, a late Neanderthal found in France's Rhine Valley, revealed that his lineage had been isolated for approximately 50,000 years, despite living only a few weeks' walk from other Neanderthal populations. This genetic isolation wasn't unique to Thorin's population. Late Neanderthal genomes from across Europe show evidence of small population sizes, limited gene flow between groups, and accumulating genetic problems that would have made these populations increasingly vulnerable to environmental pressures and demographic fluctuations. The isolation of late Neanderthal populations may have been partly self-imposed, resulting from cultural factors rather than just geographic barriers. Some researchers suggest that Neanderthal social systems were not well adapted to maintaining long-distance connections between groups, making them vulnerable to fragmentation when population densities became low. Climate change during the late Pleistocene added additional pressures to already vulnerable Neanderthal populations. The period from 45,000 to 35,000 years ago was characterized by rapid and dramatic climate fluctuations that would have stressed both human and animal populations across Europe. Heinrich Event 4, a period of extreme cold that occurred around 40,000 years ago, may have been particularly devastating for Neanderthal populations. This climate event would have drastically reduced the availability of plant and animal resources across much of Europe, forcing already struggling populations to compete for increasingly scarce resources. The volcanic eruption that created the Campanian Ignimbrite around 39,000 years ago may have delivered a final blow to many Neanderthal populations. This massive eruption, centered in southern Italy, deposited ash across large areas of Europe and may have caused a volcanic winter that further reduced resource availability. But climate change alone cannot explain Neanderthal extinction, since they had successfully survived numerous previous climate fluctuations over hundreds of thousands of years. The difference during their final millennia was the additional pressure from competing modern human populations who were also trying to survive in the same challenging environments. Modern human populations had several crucial advantages during this period of environmental stress. Their larger group sizes provided greater resilience against demographic fluctuations. Their more extensive social networks allowed them to share resources and information across greater distances. Their more diverse subsistence strategies made them less vulnerable to the loss of any single resource type. Perhaps most importantly, modern human populations were still receiving genetic and demographic reinforcement from expanding African populations, while Neanderthal populations were completely isolated and had nowhere to retreat as conditions worsened. The final extinction of Neanderthal populations appears to have been rapid once it began. Archaeological sites show clear transitions from Neanderthal to modern human occupation, often with little evidence of gradual replacement or extended coexistence. This suggests that when Neanderthal populations finally collapsed, the collapse was complete and irreversible. the last known Neanderthal. Sites in each region show evidence of increasingly desperate survival strategies. Tool assemblages become more diverse as populations try to exploit every available resource. Site locations shift to more marginal environments as prime territories were lost to modern human competitors. Some late Neanderthal sites show evidence of resource stress and nutritional deficiencies that suggest populations were struggling to meet their basic survival needs. Skeletal remains from this period show increased evidence of trauma, disease, and premature death, all indicators of populations under severe stress. The final disappearance of Neanderthal populations from their last strongholds represents one of the most tragic losses in human history. These weren't failed evolutionary experiments. They were successful human beings who had thrived for hundreds of thousands of years before succumbing to a combination of demographic, environmental, and competitive pressures that ultimately proved insurmountable. The archaeological record from these final sites provides a poignant reminder of what was lost when Neanderthals disappeared. Their sophisticated technologies, detailed environmental knowledge, and unique cultural traditions vanished forever, taking with them entire ways of understanding and interacting with the world. Understanding the final chapter of Neanderthal history helps us appreciate both their remarkable achievements and the fragility of human populations when faced with rapid environmental and social change. Their extinction serves as a warning about the vulnerability of even successful species when multiple stressors combine in unexpected ways. Chapter 10. The Great Extinction. The year is 39,000 BCE. In a small cave in what will one day become Croatia, the last Neanderthal child on Earth takes their final breath. With this death, a human lineage that had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, climate fluctuations, and countless other challenges over 400,000 years finally comes to an end. The silence that follows is deafening, not just the absence of this one life, but the extinction of an entire way of being human. This moment, though we can never precisely date it, represents one of the most profound losses in the history of our planet. When the last Neanderthal died, the world lost not just a species, but an entire branch of human consciousness, creativity, and adaptation. Gone forever were their unique ways of seeing the world, their specialized knowledge accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years, and their distinctive approaches to art, technology, and social organization. The extinction of Neanderthals remains one of the most intensively studied and hotly debated topics in human evolution. Despite decades of research and countless theories, scientists still cannot agree on exactly what caused our closest evolutionary relatives to disappear while we survived and thrived. The answer, most researchers now believe, lies not in any single factor, but in a perfect storm of circumstances that combine to overwhelm even these remarkably adaptable people. The timeline of the Neanderthal extinction is now reasonably well established, thanks to advances in radiocarbon dating and archaeological analysis. The last reliable evidence for Neanderthal presence comes from sites across Europe dating to approximately 40,000 years ago. After this point, Neanderthal fossils and their distinctive Mousterian stone tools disappear completely from the archaeological record, replaced by the remains and artifacts of modern humans. However, this extinction wasn't sudden or uniform across their range. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal populations disappeared at different times in different regions, with some areas losing their Neanderthal inhabitants thousands of years before others. Northern Europe seems to have been abandoned first, followed by central regions, with the final populations persisting in southern refugia like Spain and Italy. The pattern of this extinction provides crucial clues about its causes. The fact that northern populations disappeared first suggests that climate change may have played a significant role. As conditions became colder and harsher during the late Pleistocene, Neanderthal populations may have been forced to retreat southward, concentrating in increasingly small refugia, where they ultimately became vulnerable to final extinction. Climate change during the period leading up to Neanderthal extinction was particularly severe and unpredictable. The period from 50,000 to 35,000 years ago was characterized by rapid oscillations between warm and cold conditions, with some climate shifts occurring over periods of just decades or centuries. These rapid changes would have stressed both human and animal populations, disrupting established patterns of resource availability and forcing constant adaptation. Heinrich Event 4, occurring around 40,000 years ago, represents one of the most severe climate events of this period. This massive release of icebergs into the North Atlantic caused dramatic cooling across Europe, potentially reducing temperatures by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in some regions. Such extreme cooling would have devastated plant and animal communities, creating widespread resource scarcity that could have pushed already vulnerable Neanderthal populations over the edge. The Campanian ignimbrite eruption, which occurred around 39,000 years ago, added another layer of environmental stress. This massive volcanic eruption in southern Italy was one of the largest in European prehistory, depositing ash across vast areas and potentially causing a volcanic winter that further reduced resource availability. The timing of this eruption, coinciding closely with final Neanderthal extinctions, has led some researchers to propose it as a potential extinction trigger. But climate change alone cannot explain Neanderthal extinction. These populations had successfully survived numerous previous climate fluctuations, including full glacial periods that were more severe than anything they experienced during their final millennia. Ice ages had come and gone for hundreds of thousands of years, and Neanderthals had not only survived, but thrived through all of them. The crucial difference during their final period was the presence of competing modern human populations who were also trying to survive in the same challenging environments. This competition for resources during a period of environmental stress may have been the factor that finally tipped the balance against Neanderthal survival. Modern humans possessed several advantages that became crucial during this period of environmental stress. Their larger group sizes provided greater resilience against demographic fluctuations and local resource failures. When one area became unproductive, modern human groups could draw on support from distant relatives and allies. Neanderthals, with their smaller groups and more limited social networks, lacked this crucial backup system. The subsistence strategies of the two species also differed in ways that favored modern human survival during resource stress. While Neanderthals were primarily big game specialists who depended heavily on large mammals, modern humans had more diverse diets that included smaller game, fish, and plant foods. This dietary flexibility made modern humans less vulnerable to the loss of any single resource type. Modern human hunting technologies were also becoming increasingly sophisticated during this period. The development of projectile weapons like atlatls and eventually bows and arrows gave modern humans significant advantages in hunting efficiency and safety. While Neanderthals continued to rely primarily on thrusting spears that required dangerous close-contact hunting, modern humans could kill game from safer distances with less risk of injury. The social and technological innovations of modern humans during this period were remarkable. They developed new forms of social organization that allowed larger groups to cooperate effectively. They created extensive trade networks that could move resources and information across vast distances. They developed new technologies for food, storage, and processing that allowed them to survive periods of scarcity more effectively. But perhaps most importantly, Modern human populations were still receiving demographic and genetic reinforcement from their African homeland. While Neanderthal populations were isolated and declining, modern human numbers were being supplemented by continued migration from Africa. This demographic advantage became increasingly important as environmental conditions worsened. The disease factor, which we explored in detail earlier, may have been equally important during the extinction period. As contact between Neanderthal and modern human populations increased during environmental stress, disease transmission could have devastated Neanderthal populations that lacked immunity to modern human pathogens, the genetic evidence reveals. Another crucial factor in Neanderthal extinction: their populations were becoming increasingly isolated and inbred. Late Neanderthal genomes show clear signs of small population sizes and limited gene flow between groups. This genetic isolation would have made them more vulnerable to demographic fluctuations and reduced their ability to adapt to changing conditions. Discovery of Thorn, the isolated Neanderthal from France, illustrates this problem dramatically. Despite living within a few weeks' walk of other Neanderthal populations, his lineage had been genetically isolated for approximately 50,000 years. This level of isolation within such a small geographic area suggests that Neanderthal social systems were not well adapted to maintaining connections between groups when population densities became low. Mathematical models of Neanderthal population dynamics suggest that their extinction may have been inevitable once their numbers fell below a critical threshold. Small populations are vulnerable to what demographers call extinction vortices, cascading effects where low numbers lead to reduced reproductive success, increased inbreeding, loss of genetic diversity, and ultimately population collapse. Evidence suggests that Neanderthal populations were already experiencing demographic stress long before their final extinction. Their low population densities, small group sizes, and limited geographic range made them inherently vulnerable to environmental perturbations that larger, more widely distributed populations could survive. When multiple stressors combined: climate change, volcanic eruptions, competition from modern humans, disease transmission, and demographic isolation, the result was catastrophic for Neanderthal populations. What had been manageable challenges when faced individually became overwhelming when experienced simultaneously. The speed of final Neanderthal extinction, once it began, suggests that population collapse was rapid and complete. Archaeological sites show clear transitions from Neanderthal to modern human occupation, with little evidence of gradual replacement or extended coexistence. When Neanderthal populations finally failed, they failed completely, with no possibility of recovery. The genetic analysis of the extinction process reveals that it wasn't just a demographic collapse, it was also a genetic absorption. The final Neanderthal populations appear to have contributed genes to modern human populations through interbreeding, even as their own distinct identity was disappearing. In a sense, the last Neanderthals didn't just die out. They were absorbed into the expanding modern human gene pool. This genetic absorption may explain why Neanderthal extinction appears so abrupt in the archaeological record. Rather than maintaining separate cultural and genetic identity while their numbers dwindled, the final Neanderthal populations may have integrated into modern human communities, losing their distinct identity even as some of their genes survived. Implications of Neanderthal extinction extend far beyond the loss of a single species. Their disappearance represents the end of an alternative pathway in human evolution, a different approach to intelligence, social organization, and environmental adaptation that might have offered unique solutions to the challenges our species faces today. Understanding why Neanderthals went extinct also provides crucial insights into the factors that make human populations vulnerable to collapse. Their extinction demonstrates that even highly successful, well-adapted populations can disappear rapidly when faced with multiple simultaneous stressors. The Neanderthal extinction serves as a sobering reminder of the fragility of human populations and the importance of maintaining genetic diversity, large population sizes, and flexible adaptive strategies. In an era when our own species faces unprecedented environmental challenges, the lessons from Neanderthal extinction have never been more relevant. Their story also reminds us of the profound tragedy represented by species extinction. When the last Neanderthal died, the world lost not just a group of individuals, but an entire lineage of human experience, knowledge, and potential. The technologies they had developed, the environments they understood, the artistic traditions they had created, all of this vanished forever, impoverishing our species in ways we are only beginning to appreciate. The story of the Neanderthals is ultimately a story about us, who we are, where we came from, and what it truly means to be human. Every new discovery about our ancient cousins forces us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about intelligence, creativity, survival, and the nature of human uniqueness. What emerges from decades of revolutionary research is a picture that would have seemed impossible when the first Neanderthal bones were discovered in that German valley in 1856, when those limestone quarry workers first uncovered strange, robust bones in the Neander Valley. They thought they had found the remains of a diseased modern human, or perhaps a cave bear. The idea that they had stumbled upon evidence of an entirely different kind of human, one that had ruled Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, was beyond anyone's imagination. For over a century that followed, Neanderthals served as convenient representatives of primitive humanity, the brutish missing link that made us feel superior about our own evolutionary achievements. But science has a remarkable way of humbling our assumptions and expanding our understanding of what's possible. Today's Neanderthals bear virtually no resemblance to the shambling cavemen of popular imagination. They were sophisticated engineers who created the world's first known adhesives and operated underground chemical laboratories with precision that rivals modern industrial processes. They were master hunters who developed technologies and strategies that wouldn't be seen again for tens of thousands of years after their extinction. They were artists who painted caves and created jewelry, musicians who may have crafted the first known instruments, and compassionate caregivers who looked after their disabled and elderly with patience and dedication that speaks to the deepest levels of human empathy. They had brains that were often larger than ours, bodies that were far stronger than any modern human, and sensory capabilities that were enhanced beyond our own limitations. They survived ice ages that would have killed us, adapted to environmental challenges that would have defeated most species, and thrived in landscapes that were more hostile than anywhere humans live today. Perhaps most remarkably, they achieved all of this while maintaining sophisticated cultural traditions over periods of time that dwarf the entire span of modern human civilization. The Mousterian tool tradition lasted for over 200,000 years longer than our species has existed. Their artistic traditions, burial practices, and technological innovations demonstrate cultural continuity and knowledge transmission systems that preserved and refined human achievements across thousands of generations. The tragedy of Neanderthal extinction becomes even more profound when we understand what was lost. These weren't evolutionary failures or primitive ancestors who were inevitably destined to be replaced by superior humans. They were successful, intelligent, creative people who had developed unique solutions to the challenges of survival and had created rich cultural traditions that represented hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated human wisdom. Their extinction removed an entire branch of human diversity from the world. Alternative approaches to intelligence, social organization, and environmental adaptation that might have offered crucial insights for addressing the challenges our species faces today. We can only imagine what Neanderthals might have contributed to human knowledge, technology, and culture had they survived to interact with modern human civilizations. The circumstances of their extinction serve as a sobering reminder of how rapidly even successful species can disappear when faced with multiple simultaneous stressors. Climate change, disease transmission, demographic isolation, and competition for resources combined to create a perfect storm that overwhelmed populations that had successfully weathered countless previous challenges. Their story offers both warnings and lessons for our own species. Like the Neanderthals, we face rapid environmental change, emerging diseases, and demographic challenges that threaten population stability. Unlike them, we have the scientific knowledge to understand these threats and the technological capabilities to address them if we choose to act on that knowledge. The discovery that Neanderthals live on in the DNA of billions of people worldwide adds another dimension to their legacy. They didn't simply disappear, they became part of us, contributing genetic innovations that continue to influence human health, adaptation, and survival. Every person of non-African ancestry carries within their cells the story of ancient encounters between human species, permanent testimony to a time when multiple kinds of humans shared the earth. This genetic inheritance challenges traditional concepts of species boundaries and evolutionary relationships. Rather than evolution being a simple branching tree where lineages separate and never reconnect, the human story appears to be more like a braided river with multiple streams flowing together, separating and reconnecting in complex patterns. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the Neanderthal genetic legacy also demonstrates the value of diversity for species survival. The genetic variants we inherited from our ancient cousins have been crucial for human adaptation to non-African environments and continue to provide benefits today. They represent evolutionary innovations that were tested and refined over hundreds of thousands of years, then preserved through hybridization and passed down to modern populations. But this genetic preservation is bittersweet. We carry only fragments of the Neanderthal genome, and much of their genetic heritage was lost forever when they went extinct. The genes we inherited represent just a small sample of Neanderthal genetic diversity, and we can only wonder what other adaptations and capabilities disappeared with their extinction. The scientific revolution that has transformed our understanding of Neanderthals continues to accelerate. Ancient DNA analysis, sophisticated dating techniques, advanced archaeological methods, and artificial intelligence are revealing new aspects of their biology, behavior, and cultural achievements almost monthly. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle of human evolution and challenges our assumptions about what makes us unique. Perhaps most importantly, the Neanderthal story has fundamentally changed how we think about ourselves and our place in the natural world. Rather than seeing humans as separate from and superior to other species, our deep connection to Neanderthals emphasizes our evolutionary relationships and shared heritage with all life on Earth. The discovery that many supposedly human traits, art, music, compassion, sophisticated technology, symbolic thinking have much deeper evolutionary roots than previously imagined suggests that the qualities we value most about ourselves are not recent innovations, but ancient heritage that we share with our extinct relatives. This knowledge brings both humility and responsibility. We are not the inevitable winners of evolutionary competition, but the beneficiaries of countless chance events and the genetic gifts of our extinct relatives. Our success as a species is built on foundations laid by others who came before us, including the Neanderthals, who contributed both genes and cultural innovations to our evolutionary heritage. As we face an uncertain future, marked by environmental challenges, technological disruption, and social change, The Neanderthal story offers both inspiration and guidance. Their remarkable adaptability and resilience demonstrate what's possible when intelligence, creativity, and cooperation are combined with determination to survive. Their ultimate extinction reminds us that no species, no matter how successful or well-adapted, is guaranteed survival. Environmental change, demographic pressures, and competitive challenges can overwhelm even the most capable populations when multiple stressors combine in unexpected ways. But their genetic survival through hybridization shows that extinction is not always final, that evolutionary innovations can outlive their creators, and that cooperation between different populations can provide crucial advantages for long-term survival. The Neanderthals also remind us of the preciousness of human diversity and the importance of preserving different ways of being human. Their extinction impoverished our species in ways we're only beginning to understand, removing alternative approaches to intelligence, creativity, and survival that might have proven crucial for addressing future challenges. Today, as human cultural and genetic diversity faces new threats from globalization, environmental change, and social homogenization, the Neanderthal example emphasizes the importance of protecting and celebrating the full range of human variation and capability. The story of the Neanderthals ultimately teaches us that being human is far more complex, ancient, and remarkable than we ever imagined. We are not just one species that happened to survive, but the inheritors of a rich evolutionary heritage that includes multiple human lineages, each of which contributed unique innovations to our shared biological and cultural legacy. Their genes flow in our veins, their innovations influence our technologies, and their story shapes our understanding of what it means to be human. They remind us that we are not alone in the universe. We are part of an ancient family of intelligent, creative, adaptive beings who have been exploring the possibilities of consciousness and culture for hundreds of thousands of years. The Neanderthals never truly disappeared. They live on in our DNA, in our technologies, in our capacity for art and compassion, and in our endless drive to understand our place in the cosmos. Their legacy is not just biological but spiritual, reminder that human consciousness and creativity have deep roots, that intelligence takes many forms, and that the story of humanity is far richer and more complex than any simple narrative of progress and triumph. In the end, the Neanderthals teach us the most important lesson of all, that every human life, every human culture, and every human achievement is precious beyond measure. When they disappeared, the world lost not just a population, but an entire way of being human, a unique perspective on existence that had been refined over hundreds of thousands of years and could never be replaced. Their extinction stands as a permanent reminder of what we can lose when human diversity disappears, and their genetic survival demonstrates what we can gain when different human populations cooperate and share their evolutionary innovations. They show us both the fragility and the resilience of human life, the tragedy of extinction, and the miracle of genetic immortality. As we look to the future, the Neanderthals remain with us, not as museum specimens or archaeological curiosities, but as part of our living heritage, our genetic identity, and our ongoing evolutionary story. They remind us that we are not just modern humans living in the present, but the inheritors of an ancient legacy that stretches back hundreds of thousands of years and carries forward the achievements, adaptations, and dreams of all the human species that came before us. The Neanderthals are not the past, they are part of us, and we are part of their continuing story. In every person who carries their genes, in every technology that builds on their innovations, in every act of compassion that echoes their care for the vulnerable, the Neanderthal legacy lives on. They achieved a form of immortality that transcends individual death or species extinction. They became part of the human story itself, ensuring that their remarkable journey will continue as long as humanity endures.